you were seeing, you write in the book about the kind of poetry, uh, the the songs, sort of like cultural aspects of these protests and of these women that are coming out to say and do certain things. Can you talk a little bit about, how that manifested and what it meant for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, poetry is very important to us culturally for Iranians. And I think when I think about poetry in the Western context, it can feel elite, but in Iran, poetry is everywhere. I remember my dad, he studied to be an engineer, but even in his like high level math classes in its final year in high school, you'd also have to take a poetry class and literature class. It's very much in the education system and in the culture. You can go to the tombs of the poets in Iran, Hafez and Shiraz, and there will be people there who are illiterate that are like buskers, and they'll read you poetry. It's really everywhere. And so that's one of the things that once we zoomed out and looked at the story and thinking about themes of the book. I mean, self-expression was such a strong theme. So even looking at the official protest anthem for the movement, Baraye, is a song by Shervin Hajipur, and it won the Grammy for Subject Change that
Yeah, I
year.
can hear.
Um, and essentially, how
Sweet.
this song came to be was Iranians were tweeting. Again, it was just like a very natural thing. They were tweeting what they were out in the streets for hugging for dancing in the streets, for singing, for my mom, your mom, our mom. These are just tweets that people put out. And Shervin, this musician, took them together, made it into a song, this really beautiful ballad, and he published it. And almost immediately he was detained after it got so many, millions of views within hours. So yeah, it's very core to who we are. It's in the songs, and it's also in the protest chants and all of that. It's a deep and rich history for us.
You mentioned a little bit about women sort of at the forefront of these protests, women putting their bodies on the line. Can you talk a little bit about, the precedent of something like that in Iran and what people were telling you about why they were willing to do that?
Yeah, so I spoke with Nargis Bajogli, who is a fantastic academic anthropologist based at Johns Hopkins. And we were talking about the different protest movements that we've seen. And I said, I don't think I've seen women in direct confrontation with security forces. There's a video of a grandmother just toe to toe with a security officer with a huge gun. I'd never seen that. Or I saw videos of young schoolgirls that couldn't have been older than 11 or 12, yelling at a Basij member who came to tell them about importance of hijab. Like I've never seen this confrontation. And so I asked her and she said, no, this is the first time that we're seeing, women putting themselves really on the front lines. But Iranian women's activism is not, it has a rich history. We've seen it since, the early turn of the 20th century during the constitutional revolution. Women were organizing in that time as well. And so, yeah, it has a long and rich history, and yeah, continues to manifest too.
What did you learn about your own family in the course of this work? I think, and there's a chapter for my mom, your mom, our moms, um, where you, I think, inherit a magazine or a women's newspaper. Can you talk a little bit about the sort of inquiry that set you upon and what you learned in that process about the women's revolt, but also just the activism of women in your own lineage?
Yeah, so Iranians are not very direct people. So I've
Mm.
never, probably until I was in my late 20s, I never asked my parents, well, what was the revolution like for you? Both my sisters were born during the Iran-Iraq War. How was that? You know, I never asked these questions because we have such a deference to elders as well that I didn't want to say something that would be disrespectful or step on their toes. So yeah, I kind of was collecting these things, and then it was really nice with this book being able to come back to it. So when my grandmother passed, my mom gave me a newspaper that she left, which was an article about my great grandmother, so my maternal grandmother's mother, and she had won a Mother of the Year award from the Queen of Iran, which was really cool because everything I had learned from my family is we're not political. We're very ordinary Iranians, and that's why I used to be able to go back and forth to Iran so much because we left on a visa, and I didn't have any type of political ties. So seeing this newspaper was the first time that I saw that my family exists, that there were lineages up before me. This is something that had been so inaccessible to me because I didn't grow up there. And just understanding more of where my family came from. And in this story, my grandmother tells a story of how she was widowed young. She had 8 children, and one of them, she delivered her own child at home while everyone was asleep. And the way that she tells the story is just so matter of fact that I just like couldn't hold it. I couldn't sit with it. It's an experience that I really just like, yeah, I can't put myself in her shoes at all. But this is the lineage of women that I come from, and that felt really, really powerful. And then the other thing that I learned that I got to write about was I always heard that my mom's father was a very wealthy person. He worked in tobacco. Oh, Nilu, something happened one day and he lost all his money and never made money again. Like that's what was told to me. And then once I started learning about the constitutional revolution that was happening at that time, I learned about the tobacco concessions, and I learned, oh, okay, this was a deal in which tobacco farmers or anyone in tobacco had to, all the tobacco rights were owned by England. So even if you farmed it, you had to sell it and buy it back to sell it in Iran. So that was actually the center of the first modern protest movement in at that point Persia's history. So I kind of got to see, where my family was situated. And because I'd always heard we're bazaris, we're traders, but I never really understood that until, I had the opportunity to dig back into family history.
Yeah. I can imagine that looking at all of this from a distance, both delving into your own history, um, but sort of taking in what you're seeing in real time, which can be extremely graphic, can be really disturbing, has its own difficulties. Can you talk a little bit about, I think people sometimes call this like secondary trauma or vicarious trauma. Can you talk a little bit about the psychological stress of doing some of this work and like efforts you made to mitigate that?
Yeah, so I knew that probably writing about my family or, I really didn't want to write about like that it was hard to immigrate and was sad a lot as a child. Like I just didn't want to write about that, but my editor really encouraged me. She said, take up space. Like this is an experience that many immigrants can connect with, and it's your story. And so I had been doing therapy before, just because I already look at a lot of graphic imagery through work, but
Yeah.
I approached it in a different way where I said I really want to like set up my tools of success here and how to do this work. And for me, that looked like a lot of breaks, like really giving myself time, stepping away from writing was really important. But yeah, I mean, breaks are really key. And also understanding that, like, when the protests were starting in 2022, I was really slow. And even when I wrote about in the book and I read it back now, like I wasn't reflective about that. I just thought, oh, I'm slow, it's difficult. But the dots that I connected this time was when there were airstrikes in Iran, and I was seeing, streets I've been to in Tehran being hit with airstrikes. It's such a different experience to see places that you've known, suffer airstrikes in this way. It was like my brain had stalled in like second gear, and I just like couldn't get out of it. And I talked to my therapist, like, what do I do? I'm experiencing vicarious trauma. And she said, no, like it's not secondhand. Like you are actually this is your community. Like you have to approach your work from a different place. And no wonder you're slow. Like really giving myself grace and understanding that like it's just going to be a different pace that I'm able to work at when this work is so difficult.
Yeah, I think that really, I mean, this is beautiful and on a number of levels, which, like the question I asked you was very much about secondary trauma, but what you were dealing with was so personal. And I really, I think this is something a lot of journalists, especially when they delve into their own backstories or things to which they have a connection, might encounter. And so that's really valuable information. I wanted to ask you, was there a particular break that you particularly loved or something that really stands out when you look back?
Honestly, it's like the routine while the work is really hard was the most helpful. Like being able to, because I never like took vacation like I was writing but just in the morning saying, okay, I'm going to intentionally take 90 minutes and I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to touch grass and go for a little walk. And the first thing that I'm going to do is not jump into my phone. Like I really needed that mental break and to really have like a time off and say, okay, well now I've worked for 10 hours. I really need to take a break. I'd be taking many breaks in the middle, but and my editors are really, really good about that at the Post. And so being able just to communicate with them really frankly and having those boundaries put in has been deeply helpful.
Beautiful. Um, in the book, you talk about these acts of solidarity or notes that people were passing to one another, things they were doing for one another. I would imagine that maybe taking that in might also be gratifying and helpful to see. But can you just also describe that? You guys write about it so beautifully. What were you seeing?
Yeah, so this is when the protests were going on. Fatima and I communicated a lot through email.
Mhm.
And so she would send me pictures of notes that women were passing in the protests. So at this point, people weren't taking their phones to protest because if you were filming, the Basij would come snatch your phone and then use that to come and find you after. And so when Fatima was going out protesting, she would say, "I'm going out." And I'd say, "Great, let me know when you're back." And so just for me to feel good about that. So she would go and come back and she would send me these, pictures of notes that she got, say people writing women, life, freedom, and calligraphy, which was beautiful. Just little notes of encouragement like your hair looks so much more beautiful out and flowing, or little pictures. It was just, yeah, it's really nice to see that level of connection. And it made me feel like I was there myself as well. So that was cool.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I think there was one with like chocolate with slogans on them. Am I remembering
Yes.
correctly?
Yeah, little sweets with slogans, yeah, that were passed
Oh my
around.
gosh, that is all the reason to be a reporter is more chocolate.